When did you learn about it?
The which part of it? The topic that you selected or the Christ descending into hell?
About where he descended?
Dude, bro, it was the craziest experience. And I guess this is just a little background before we get started, guys. Um, when I was growing up in Catholic classes and going to CCD, which is like the name of the catechism classes that we take, I remember it being part of the creed where we would say, he it was incarnate of the Virgin Mary, became man, was crucified, died, buried, descended into hell, was buried for 3 days, and on the third day rose again, and then ascended into heaven. So I remember the hell part being like a fundamental part of what we would say during
I don't
classes.
remember that.
And then it's like now in Mass, and I've noticed that it's not in there. And but I
Yeah.
find it's two different creeds. It's two different creeds. I was doing some research on this, and it's part of my slideshow that we'll get into. This is just like a little teaser while we wait for Nadeo. So this is live call 7, guys. And this picture here that I included on the title slide, like Daniel, you'll see that this is a little different than the other PowerPoints I've put together, because I think Christ, when he went into the underworld, is like such a big topic, and it's so complex that I think that the images of it happening are necessary, right? On the other two PowerPoints I've made for these calls, I do a little clip art look, like a little like a small tiny graphic that suggests what I'm saying, but this time I've included some of the best artwork I could find to really depict the scene, because even as I'm researching it, it's just a big deal. So many Christians don't know about it. So many people have differing views upon it. Some churches don't include it in their teachings. We're going to get into that, but it's a beautiful thing. Is also what I want to say. Like hell is like a pretty scary word for a lot of us, but Christ descending into hell is, to me, a very beautiful piece of the resurrection and his crucifixion, or overall Christ's passion, which is a term I just recently learned, means his time on the cross, his suffering on the cross, his death on the cross, his eventual burial, and then his resurrection is all kind of included as like the passion is basically his time on the cross, which is the main event of his life. He did other things, but the main thing you got to know about Christ Jesus is he died for us on the cross, and that is termed in one word as passion. But that I just had to share that with you guys because I recently learned that. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. Yeah, so this is my normal topic of discussion page. You may recognize we only got one here: souls in paradise before Christ's passion. And this image here is extremely important. This, is a very, not really a realistic look, but it just shows what happened in a really beautiful way. And I'm going to get into that in the next slide, but I had to include that right there. And so, and this is another illustration. You'll see, like, where were the souls before Christ, right? This is a great way to open this presentation up. If you were a righteous soul and believed in the Trinitarian Christian God before Christ comes to the earth through the Virgin Mary, where did you go, right? Because in order for us to understand the story of Christ, Christ is the only way we make it back to the Father, right? So to me, this answered so many of my questions, because I was like, okay, well, what if someone's a really good guy before Christ dies on the cross? What happens to them? And this presentation is going to answer all of those questions. And this is a really beautiful image of Christ almost, opening the doors of death and letting a few select souls out. And then we're going to get into that. So in order to understand what we're talking about here, you need to where are we talking about, right? So I have some diagrams in the next slide that are going to show exactly where, in the biblical description of Earth, where is this paradise location. So there's a lot of words on the screen here, but I'm going to break them down. So we have to primarily understand that no one could return to the Father before the crucifixion. Okay? Today, we only know hell, right? We know heaven and hell and earth. We know like a few locations. But in the Old Testament, it's referred many different ways, depending on which language you're reading, the time of the translation. So here are a few of the words. So, in this slideshow, I'm going to call it paradise quite a bit, but it's paradise. But that paradise is in quotes, right? Because today, paradise we think of as heaven, but paradise meant a very, very different thing pre-Christ, okay? Pre-Christ incarnation on earth. Paradise, Sheol, which is a Hebrew word, limbo, Hades, which is a Greek term, or just underworld, right? If we look at the Hebrew, in Hebrew, there were two different words for the underworld, okay? There was Sheol, which was basically the description of the entire underworld. And then they had another term, Gehenna, which is like how we would understand hell today. Fiery torment, bad place for sinners, right? Eternal separation from God. But they used Hebrew in Hebrew, Sheol to do where all the souls went. Sheol was kind of like the land of the dead underneath earth. Okay. Another way to break it down is that there's three levels to Sheol or underworld. There's paradise, in quotes, because it's not paradise like heaven, but paradise, where righteous souls go to. This is where, the prophets of the Old Testament are. Adam and Eve were there, right? People of God, but just Christ hadn't come to earth, so they can't go to heaven. So they're in a place called paradise, which is still in the underworld. It's in Sheol, but there's no torment there. There's in the Bible, it talks about a great chasm that separates paradise and torment, right? And what we would think is there's tormented souls on one side of the chasm, and then there's paradise on the other side. But that doesn't make sense in the way we think of heaven and hell today. But it made tons of sense. So in the Old Testament, it talks about paradise is separated from the tormented souls by a great chasm or a great gulf. And that doesn't really make sense in our modern understanding of heaven above earth and then hell. The great chasm and great gulf is not the terrestrial earth in which we walk today. It was when paradise and torment were both in the underworld. Okay? So torment can be, understood as your traditional understanding of hell. Bad people go there, they're getting tortured, they're eternally separated from you, a lot of suffering, a lot of anguish, a lot of pain. That's torment. Okay? Even whilst Christ is on the earth, he will still refer to it as paradise and torment. If you can remember, he says, whilst he's on the cross, he talks to the one thief who calls him Lord and says, tonight you'll be in paradise with me. He was still referring to paradise that's underground in Sheol, in the underworld at that time, right? So up until the moment of Christ's crucifixion and ultimate death, there's still paradise, torment, and Tartarus. It's still only the underworld. No one can go to heaven. There's not a single soul in heaven, right? Doesn't matter how holy a life you lived. You could be literally Moses, but you weren't able to go to heaven. That is only allowed when we reconcile ourselves to Christ through his sacrifice, okay? So paradise, torment, and Tartarus. Tartarus is like the lake of fire, which is where the fallen angels are incarcerated, which is an even separate location, right, than where the damned souls are. The human souls that did bad stuff on earth are not even in Tartarus. Tartarus is exclusively for demons, who were once angels, who are basically eternal separation from God in Tartarus. So that's one way it's been broken down to me, is paradise, torment, and Tartarus. And then the big key distinction you need to make here is, if you want to understand Sheol and Gehenna in English terms, it's kind of like place of the dead versus place of the damned, right? So those are different. You could die, but you weren't a bad person. So that's where that separation comes to the Hebrews. And this was a big pill for them to swallow even after Christ came back, right? When Christ, ultimately rises from the grave and begins to walk amongst the Hebrews again, they still are like, shaken up. And that's why to this day there are people who reject Christ, because he's trying to turn all of this understanding on its head. You see, so much of my learning, at least when I realize that Christ is the truth and I'm trying to get a better grapple on this kind of stuff, is like, why were the Hebrews who lived with Christ, are from the same land as Christ, reject him? Continue to reject him. Like, how are there people who claim to be Jewish today, right? It's like, these are people who continually reject the teachings of Christ because he was flipping this entire system upside down, right? So people don't like that. It's hard for people to believe. This is the way it's been taught amongst Hebrews for millennia, right? And then, an individual named Jesus Christ of Nazareth, right? Especially when he hasn't even come back from the grave yet, it was difficult for them to understand what he was talking about. And then even upon his return, and then now the disciples are trying to tell people about it. They're really not hearing him, right? There's so much in the New Testament that talks about the Hebrews or the Jews, whichever you want to call them, were continually rejecting, so almost forcing the disciples to go preach to the Gentiles or the non-Jews. And it was surprising at first to the disciples, but they came to understand why. That the Gentiles or the Greeks, which would be anybody that's not Jewish, basically, is a Gentile, were more responsive. And that's as you read the New Testament, you'll find that. And a quick question here before I continue: has anyone familiar with Dante's Inferno? Nicole?
Yeah, I watched a couple summary videos about Dante's Inferno,
Yeah, me too.
which was yeah, it was very interesting. It was through Dante's Inferno that I started to get an idea of what hell looks like,
Yeah.
and the purpose it serves.
Mhm.
But I guess that's not canon to the Bible.
Yeah, yeah. So that's perfect. That you couldn't, I couldn't have said it any better than that. That is like my introduction to what hell looked like as well, right? And it's basically shaped almost all of humanity since Dante's time. His writing was so profound. Uh, he spoke about Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso in one like, and he was publishing his work in Italian when no one was doing that. Everyone in Italy was publishing in Italian, I mean Latin, excuse me. So the Italian people who didn't understand Latin, which was the language of the intellectuals, could read Dante's Inferno, and it was like, everybody was reading. It was extremely popular. I mean, he was in exile at the time. There's all these political reasons he wrote what he wrote, but one thing I've been told is, we can't accept Dante's work as canon, right? He had political motivations for making it, but I have to think that his writings are so detailed that perhaps God had an element in it of guiding his pen, right? But most of Earth today understands hell through Dante's lens, right? I wanted to clear it up, and I didn't start with Dante because, like Cole said, it's technically not biblical canon, and the church doesn't honor it as such. He's not looked at as a prophet, right? All these things, but I've read it. I've read even a Purgatorio, which I was going to make this PowerPoint about, but I'm going to save that for another time. Just the ideas of purgatory itself, which is unique to Catholics. We talked about on the last call with Nadale that Orthodoxy has some kind of intermittent place before a soul hits heaven, but even that is up for debate within the Eastern Orthodox Church. And I know for a fact that Protestants don't honor that. The Catholics really talk about a purgatory, but Dante has a vivid description of all three levels of hell, purgatory, and heaven. And I just begun Paradiso, or heaven, in Italian before this presentation. So I haven't read that far yet, but I'm bringing it up because it was the first time I had heard of where were the souls who were good guys, but Christ didn't come down yet, right? Because to me it was like a big disconnect. I didn't understand. Like, oh, until Christ did this, no one could go to the Father. This is, what we understand. But then the biggest question was like, okay, but what about the other prophets? They were intimately with the Father. The Father spoke through them. So it's like, it was this big question. And to me, it's answered perfectly in this understanding of there's paradise, which is one level of Sheol, or the underworld. There's torment for the souls of the damned, and there's Tartarus for the fallen angels. And those are three separate levels of the same underworld-like place. And every culture at that time believed in the underworld. I think a soul going into heaven didn't exist in any ancient religions, if I remember correctly. Like a big example I'm thinking of is the Greeks. The Greeks left the heavens and the sky for the Olympians, right, which is their set of polytheistic gods. And they don't talk about you die and you go to Zeus. Like that's exclusively a Christian thing after the time of Christ. But they did talk about a multi-tiered, every single soul goes to the underworld, not just bad people. And to me, this has been a huge connect for me that, like, so all the learning I did in that wasn't in vain because it helps me explain this better. And I'm not, advocating for Greek mythology. I think, Christ is the truth. I don't really think we need to concern ourselves with what those other people believe. The pagans, multi-god worshiper, nature worshippers believed, right? I think Christ is the truth. But Dante specifically, if anybody after this call wants to read Dante's work, he does a very interesting, in my opinion, one of the first people ever, and perhaps the last, to mix both. When you read Dante's Inferno and he's talking about hell, there'll be Greek mythology heroes and gods there, and monsters as well, with Christian figures at the same time. So to Dante, he painted a world, or wrote a world, right, that has both. They exist in the same timeline. It's very interesting. So, it's technically fiction, but if you can get one of the copies, I'll reference one of my copies in the comments. So if anyone plans on reading Dante's work, I would urge, there's a particular copy that I've read that has not only the original Italian translated into English, right? But it's a poem. The whole thing is a long poem. And his writing is so complex that I was able to learn most of it from a breakdown after that has footnotes. And I'm reading the breakdown. I'm reading his work. It's poem. It's limited structure. It's written in a very unique way. And then there's like the breakdown. So that's a copy that I would recommend if someone does want to look at Dante's work. But Dante's work in Inferno was the first time he talks about like the noble pagans or the virtuous, righteous pagans who never had Christ, so they can't go to heaven. So this is kind of on brand, or on topic rather. I thought it was worth mentioning. So in this picture here, you guys can see this is the biblical description of Earth. Okay, I believe this to be the true. Just going to say this for the record. I believe this to be the true description of Earth. I think this is how Earth actually is. Not a very popular idea, but I think it's worth mentioning. And we jump down some of the rabbit holes that I've jumped down. This becomes extremely clear that this is actually what's happening, but that's a topic for another slideshow. But it's like an intellectual responsibility for me to mention that. But if you look here, you can see on the left it says underworld, and on the right it says Sheol. If you look at the one on the right is more colored graphic. There's some different information that I like on each, so I thought it would be good to include both. But this is what we're talking about when we talk about the underworld. The lake of fire where the fallen angels are burning is one piece of the underworld. And before Christ's crucifixion, death, and resurrection, everybody had to go there. So there was like a tier system, right? No souls went to heaven. I just want to be very clear about that. But in this picture, you can really see what I'm talking about, where Sheol is a large space underground, and now it's just hell. Righteous souls don't go to Sheol anymore, or the underworld. Now, through Christ's sacrifice, through Christ's passion on the cross, we are allowed, if we believe in Him, trust in Him, and live a life that is serving of that ideal, we are allowed to return to the Father. And to me, I think this is why Christ is so groundbreaking, right? You can understand this. Once you get this understood, Christ is an even more important figure, right? Christ, if you look at a biblical history, is relatively recent in terms of a figure like Moses or Noah, or Abraham. Those are very, very ancient people, even at the time where Christ was walking around. And for us, that's 2,000 years ago. We look at that as so far away. Christ really did flip everything on its head, and he's changed so much. So to me, after we complete this slideshow, I think all of you will even understand why Christ is an even more important figure. And I don't know why other churches, sidestep this topic, or even my Catholic church, where it's Catholic doctrine that he did this. He went to the underworld and gathered up souls and took them to heaven for the first time. But they don't talk about it a lot. But to me, it completes the picture. And this I have to say this is how I feel about Christianity in general, is that the more you look, the more you learn, the more you study, it completes the picture even further, and your faith intensifies. And there's no, people with atheist arguments in this call. I don't think you would, sign up to be part of this call and donate your time on a Friday to learn these things if, you are still struggling. Is Jesus true? I think this is kind of like a level 2 or level 3 Christianity course, is how I'm coming to understand it. When we talk about these topics, but it's to an atheist, they would think that you're going to find holes, right? In order for the atheist to be correct, Christianity is a human invention that is really convincing to dumb people. At least that's their frame. But to me, I move further and further towards Christ with study. All of my questions have been answered. All of the gripes or problems I had with Christianity before returning to the faith, because I had an atheist stint, or a godless stint. I think a lot of people do, but I was a teenager / young adult at that time. And now there's a level of faith that I can have because I understand topics like this, that I think this content or these discussions are important because I want other people to get to that level. There's a great book that put it one way, where it says most people love Christ with their heart, but this book, or others like it, allows you to love Christ with your mind, where the analytical parts of you can also get on board, and it doesn't have to be blind faith. I think faith is important for everyone. Sorry?
That's so good.
Yeah, but this is, this is what I needed to get this far, right? I was ultra skeptic. I was Mr. Skeptic, right? And before Christ, and before pulling these diagrams up for you guys, I was a big, I don't know, I liked studying stuff, right? Sometimes it was biology facts. I was really into space at one point, different things in my life, things I was became obsessive with in terms of learning. And Christ and Christendom and this kind of stuff it doesn't end. I could put 10 lifetimes in. This is what I tell people all the time. I could put 10 lifetimes of studying at this intensity or more, and I would never exhaust it. And so I take pity on those who think that Christianity is for dumb people. or we got hoodwinked into believing this stuff like this. The people who really have been thinking for thousands of years are focused on this, and they're still going at it. And that's why Catholicism or Orthodoxy, but Catholicism especially, has such a rich history of intellectuals getting together and saying, we got to get to the bottom of this. And they continue to push out that work, publish that work, and that work is available to us. So in the next slide here, this is the moneymaker right here, guys. This is should show you really what was going on. So you have all of these, ancient figures, and then this is Christ walking through the underworld, walking through Hades, Sheol, whichever term you prefer, and these souls who have been dead for a long time, been dead for an incalculable amount of years, since the dawn of humanity. These are the righteous ones, obviously, so there's no torture going on. They see the light of Christ, and I can't imagine that level of surprise. I mean, some of them probably knew it, some of them were prophets themselves, and they said someone was coming, but this image is kind of one you want for your wall, where it kind of encapsulates what was happening. And I think it's so as I build this PowerPoint, I need to take a whole slide for this picture. You know what I mean? In other slideshows I've made, it's little clip art, but this topic, this is huge. And I had assembled a lot of these images before making this PowerPoint. These really resonate with me. I can't explain it. Christ is the central figure for the living, but these are souls that had passed on who were saved by him, which is to me an underrepresented piece of Christianity that is really important to me. And yeah, I can't explain how this particular image makes me feel, but this is phenomenal. All right, so next slide. So if you were to talk about this topic with someone else, right, and what I found through my research is it has a technical term. Instead of saying, what was Christ doing between crucifixion and resurrection, it's called the harrowing of hell. Okay, I didn't start with that because I don't think it's descriptive on its own. I had to give you all that background, right? But if you were to do a Google search or you wanted to find where this art is, right, it's under the harrowing of hell. And cultures have depicted it in many ways. This is obviously one style. I'll show you a couple other ones that are more icon style, and that's what the Orthodox tend to venerate even within the church, is Orthodox style paintings. But this one is my favorite. But so how I thought to bring this up in a PowerPoint format is I've been praying the rosary recently, and every Catholic knows what the rosary is. Every Catholic probably has one or two rosaries in the home, right? But for me, it was never something that I knew how to use properly, right? I had a basic understanding of it when I was through CCD classes or through the catechism classes or the church classes that you do as a kid to get confirmed in the Catholic Church. But in terms of I know exactly what to do at each bead or what every part of the rosary means, it was a lot that I've learned. And I have some on my whiteboard to the left of me that I can probably share at some point in the community. But basically, if you remember, for those of you that were here from the very start of this call, I was talking about how when I was in church classes, I remembered reciting that Christ went to hell. And then now when I go to Mass, it's not talked about in the creed. So I found out there's two different creeds to Catholics. There's the Apostles' Creed, which is extremely ancient, as the other creed is, but I think the other one is just the Nicene Creed. So there are two different creeds, right? The Apostles' Creed is often recited as a prayer. So in order to get the rosary started for the Catholics in here, if someone's interested in Catholicism, if you want to pray the rosary, you start with the Apostles' Creed. And I don't have the whole thing here. It's a long prayer. If people are interested in that, I can link that later. But I just wanted to get this particular excerpt, which is, Jesus Christ was crucified, died and was buried. He descended into hell. On the third day, he rose again from the dead. He ascended into heaven. It goes on and on and on. But it was like an integral piece, you see? And this is what I remember from my youth, but no one really talks about it too much. I really wouldn't be surprised if the people who are listening to this is the first time you've ever heard that Christ went to hell. It's not talked about a lot, but it's very interesting to me. So the best way we can distill from this is the time between crucifixion and resurrection. And when I mentioned Orthodoxy earlier in the call, the Orthodox, it's a big part of how they celebrate Easter. Holy Saturday they talk about the harrowing of hell. They have a special feast for it. It's a big part of their celebration. And then, so the way we can think about it is he gathered up the souls unto himself and led them into heaven. And this is a big deal because this is the first time any soul has entered heaven. It never existed before. The best, you live the most righteous life. Let's say you were literally a prophet, a mouthpiece for God on earth. You still went to Sheol, but you just were not tortured there, right? You could not return to the Father. In Christ, was so groundbreaking, right? Even at that time, because he took that whole philosophy of where do souls go, where are souls, and flipped it completely. Now you can return to the Father. Now, so heaven, there is no heaven without Christ, is one way to think of it, right? When we think of sometimes other religions, right, they'll have ideas of afterlife. If we have a friend who's Jewish and doesn't believe in Jesus Christ, there is no heaven without Jesus. And I don't feel like it's talked about a lot that way, right? It's like he was always an important figure to me, and I think he's essential, right? If we listen to his words in the gospel, no one gets to the Father except through me. I and my Father are one. There's all these quotes that we love, right? And I have a section in the slideshow just for my Bible guys who really do enjoy when I quote the scripture or can look up a verse. I have a section for that coming. But this is even more profound, that there is no Christ without heaven. If you were born before Christ, you couldn't go to heaven until he ultimately made the sacrifice that he did on the cross. So Old Testament prophets and the righteous are those that were taken up from hell. Like not every soul in hell went. Like you were a bad dude, you're still in torment. That didn't end for you. If you did some very bad things, like the fallen angels weren't gathered up, right? It was exclusively for the righteous souls who would have earned heaven had they been born after Christ's incarnation. So they were kind of in prison. And that's what we're going to get to later. It was like a holding cell. And for those of you that really require scriptural evidence before you can get on board with something, a lot of the Bible quotes I'm going to show you in a second talk about it as a prison. It was like a waiting room. They were not being tormented there. And today we can't think about the underworld without fire and torture and demons, right? And this was a very different thing. And then in depictions of this harrowing of hell, a lot of the times Adam and Eve are shown and Christ grabs them by the wrist. And through my research, it was revealed to me that illustrates in just images, no words, that original sin man cannot pull himself out of original sin. Christ actually came and grabbed Adam and Eve by the wrist. So it's a very rich piece of Christianity that is, I'm so glad I put this together, and I have a couple more images I want to get to real quick. So this is two different depictions. I just put them on the same slide because they kind of fit. On the left here, you can just kind of see a little bit of the moment of a glowing Christ grabbing the hands of people and pointing up. Like this was a huge deal. There's even a little shred of chains and doors, which I'll get to in a second, is part of how it's depicted. And then this one on the right is like a cave-looking situation where Christ is physically reaching down and grabbing souls. And you can see these souls. Some of them look, a little too skinny. They don't look the best. Some of them. But Christ comes in, his blue and red, or his red and purple. You can tell that that's the central figure of the art, and he's grabbing them out. So I love these two as well. So in this one, this is the scriptural references. This is from my Bible guys, right? I've noticed that there are two different types of Christians. Some of us really, really lean on the Bible. And I think everyone should be familiar with the Bible. I think everyone should read the Bible. But I've noticed through watching back the recordings of previous calls that I should, give more attention to actual scriptural references when I'm talking about things. So I have that here. So in Ephesians 4:9 is a little clip here. It says, descended into the lower parts of the earth when talking about Christ. 1 Peter 3:19-20, in which he went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison. See, that's that prison word we're talking about. Because they formerly did not obey when God's patience waited in the days of Noah. Okay? And then Matthew 12:40, for just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the sea monster, so for 3 days and 3 nights, the Son of Man will be in the heart of the earth. And if you understand the way the Hebrews talked about the underworld, it's in the very center, and it's everybody's there. It's the heart of the earth. So I don't think Matthew 12:40 could be misinterpreted as him walking the earth and all these things. So I think this is so for some churches, I have to say this is not enough. Like this is a few that I've clipped, but Protestants especially, they have a tendency to say if I can't literally read it right from my Bible, I'm not gonna honor it. But not included in this slideshow, but I can link it after if you desire. There's all these church fathers, like Saint John Chrysostom especially, was very, very adamant in talking about the harrowing of hell. Christ descended to hell to save the righteous souls pre his incarnation. It's dated back to writings and church teachings we have from even the 2nd century. So that's really early church stuff. That's before the penning of the Bible. This was a part of Christian teaching. And just for full transparency for the new people in here tonight, and also when this recording is made. For me, that is my basis, right? I got a very, very sola scriptura pilled, I guess you could say, where there's people who only believe what the Bible says, but the Bible is a collection of, if you read it, you'll know, like it's a collection of letters, a collection of far reaching testimonies. It's different authors, it's different time periods. It skips some time, then comes back. It's a lot of things are happening in the Bible, and it was collected by the church. So the church was doing things for hundreds of years before the Bible was finished and before anyone could say this is the Bible. But the sola scriptura people is mostly Protestants who say, if I don't see that in my Bible at my house, I'm not going to honor it. And so just full transparency, in these presentations, sometimes I'm talking about things that are extra biblical. Like I think it's my duty to explain to you guys what I know and what I believe about church tradition and its validity, right? So many times in the Gospels, this is one of my favorite things to say. I say this frequently. Christ is giving a parable or a big story or a big metaphor to the masses when he's preaching in front of 5,000 people, right? And the disciples are to his right or his left and say, Lord, why are you speaking this way? Like, why are you saying it this way? And he explains to them, they have eyes, but they do not see. They have ears, but they do not hear. I have to teach them this way. But for you, my disciple, we have other talks. So to me, church tradition and some of these extra biblical things that, is part of church tradition for 2,000 years is that other stuff that the disciples have. And if you understand the priest class in Christianity, there's apostolic succession, where since the apostles, every priest can trace back his connection. The apostles had a finite life, a lot of them martyrs, right? From there, they pass on the leadership of the church through their own right, through the right of Christ, rather, to the next guy, to the next guy, to the next guy. Then that guy dies, and the next guy, and the next guy, and the next guy. So they can all trace back, not just the Pope. A lot of people know that about the Pope, but not just the Pope. All priests within the Catholic and the Orthodox Church can trace their priesthood back to the apostles. I think I have another set of images here. Okay, so in this one is another double image here because they kind of fit on the same slide. On the right, you can see that he's standing on this like X or this cross. And this is, these two are not like icons in the traditional sense for the Orthodox Church, but the Orthodox especially almost always depict this event, and I think I have one more image of it. They almost always depict this event of him standing on two doors. Those are two doors. Those are the doors of hell, or the doors of the underworld, or the doors of death. So as I give this presentation, and I'm going back through this. I mean, I built this today, but going back through it, to me, it's like I don't understand how you understand Christ without this. Like, this is a very essential piece to what Christ did in his time on earth, and this is I really do love this depiction of him standing on the doors, because his resurrection, his crucifixion, his ultimate resurrection, are not just because we're so bad. That is a piece of it, to overcome the sin that we could not overcome, and we will never be able to overcome. It's human nature today to sin. Like, there's an Orthodox quote that I really love. It's like, if man was alive for 1 hour, he would still sin. And to me, it's like, just puts everything to perspective here. Like, that's our nature. There is no good human without Christ. So that being said, we understand that Christ died for our sins, but he also died and overcame evil and death. Right? He overcame death with his resurrection. When before this, like death, no, look at all these souls. I don't know if you guys can see where I'm pointing, but on the right image where he's standing on the doors, these are all souls that have already died, and they still could not go back to God. They were good people. Like, this is the thing. They believed in the Trinitarian Christian God, right? They worshiped Christ before his incarnation, right? God. And they were great people, some of them mouthpieces for God himself as prophets, but could not return. So Christ is a big deal, coming down and saving souls who, since the dawn of humanity, I think is a great way of putting it, and should be understood. So let's see, I have one more slide here. Okay, yeah, this is another one, and these are two. The one on the left, definitely. I mean, Nadale, you probably recognize this exact style, as this is Orthodox icons. The Catholic Church uses them too, but specifically the Orthodox, this is like their look, like the way that this Christ's complexion is, the way that halos look. And on the right is a more modern, I think, loose interpretation, but still standing on the doors of death, because that's how powerful Christ is. He did not just only overcome our sins. He wasn't just there for that. He overcame both sin and death. And I think that's really important. And not just his own death, right? Because that's another thing. I thought when they said he overcame death, it was just his own death. But now the original sin condemnation that every man must die does not separate us from the Father. And that's why the Adam and Eve, if you flip back, when I was talking about them grabbing Adam and Eve, I don't have any depictions of it here, but Adam and Eve is often depicted, Christ grabbing them by the hand, because this can be linked back to your original sin. So in original sin, we leave the garden. We can no longer walk with God. Through Christ, he rescues Adam from the underworld and says, now death is not eternal separation from the Father. You can return through Christ. So it's like Christ is one of those figures where yes, New Testament's important. Christ doesn't show up till the New Testament in human form, but the Old Testament understanding, I find as I talk to more and more Christians, makes Christ make more sense. You see, like it increases the gravity of Christ. Sometimes I tell people, whether I should or not, I tend to skip to Christ. Like, you need to get there as fast as you can, because the Old Testament is so long, so lengthy. Many people will not start on the first page and get to Christ. They give up, like the Bible's difficult read. So I'll tell people, like, yo, you should probably skip to the New Testament, hear of Christ. But what I'm learning now is, like, if you didn't go through Genesis, this Adam and Eve original sin thing that I'm touching on is not as significant. You may not know, everything that happened when we were expelled from the garden and that death is sent into the world for the first time. But let's see what else I have here, guys. Okay, that's it. That is the end of my slideshow. I have one more topic that is reserved for Daniel. I was going to incorporate it in the slideshow, but out of all the slideshows I've made, like, this one is this is the most slides I've done on one topic, and they're not sparse. There's a lot of words. Oh, this is great. Now that I've done the whole thing, you guys should look at these again, and you can see in the biblical description of Earth where Sheol is. It's this big black mass that is connected to the Earth, but that's where everyone was. And this is a great description, because it even has in the Bible, talks about the great deep. And when God creates the earth, he separates the waters. Like, that doesn't really make sense unless you see it this way, that there was the waters above and the great deep. Those are separate things, which is then even still separate from earth itself. And earth is on 4 pillars. It's all these pieces of the Bible that I think this is huge. So I can probably link some of these images into the community. This way you guys have them outside the slideshow, but